Touch her again, Calloway said, and I will end your career before lunch. He was talking to the dog. Rex 7 didn't move, didn't blink, just stood over the man on the ground, 220 pounds of former ranger face in the dirt, one arm locked at an angle that made 3 witnesses look away, and waited for the word that would release him. It never came. Because Lara Vance hadn't given it. She didn't need to. 5 men still standing, 1 already finished, and she hadn't thrown a single punch. She just looked at Calloway and said, "Who's next?" Nobody moved. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The file that landed on Colonel Marcus Dreyer's desk that Tuesday morning was thin. Too thin. That was the first thing that bothered him. In 22 years of running joint operations training at Camp Ridgeline, a classified facility tucked into the coastal hills of the Pacific Northwest, Marcus Dreyer had never once received a personnel transfer with so little documentation attached to it. Name: Captain Lara Vance, Branch Navy. Current assignment: K-9 Tactical Operations Reassignment, following non-disclosed deep cover operation. Clearance level: redacted. Accompanied by K-9 Unit Rex 7 Belgian Malinois Combat Classified. That was it. No deployment history. No performance reviews. No citation records. No photograph. Just a name, a dog, and a clearance level so buried under black ink that Dreyer's own Level 4 access couldn't pull the attached files. He read it 3 times. Then he picked up the phone. "Get me someone from Naval Special Warfare Command," he said to his aide. "Now." The line rang for a long time. When someone finally answered, the voice on the other end was calm. Too calm for the hour. Too calm for the question being asked. "Colonel Dreyer?" "Who is Lara Vance?" he said. A pause. "She's your new K-9 integration consultant. She arrives Thursday." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. Longer this time. "Colonel, the file is what the file is. Captain Vance is to be given full facility access, unrestricted movement, and professional courtesy appropriate to her rank. That is the extent of what I am authorized to tell you." The line went dead. Dreyer set the phone down slowly. He looked at the file again. Then he looked out his window at the yard below, where 6 of the base's contracted security personnel were running drills. Private contractors, ex-Special Forces men he'd brought in 8 months ago, specifically because they were the hardest, most capable operators he could source outside the uniform. Men led by Briggs Calloway, former Ranger, 2 combat tours, a chest full of decorations, and a mouthful of opinions about everything. He watched them for a long moment, and for a reason he couldn't entirely explain, a cold thread of worry moved through him. Thursday came gray and damp. She arrived without announcement. No convoy, no escort vehicle, no aide carrying a bag. Just a woman in plain clothes stepping out of a rental car in the east parking lot, a canvas duffel over one shoulder, and a Belgian Malinois walking beside her without a leash. The dog was enormous for the breed, not in height, but in presence. He moved with a stillness that was almost eerie, like every muscle in his body was coiled to a degree that ordinary dogs simply weren't capable of. His coat was dark, almost black across the saddle. His eyes were the color of old amber, warm in hue, utterly cold in focus. He didn't look around the yard the way dogs usually do. He scanned it. There was a difference. Anyone who'd spent time with working dogs understood the difference immediately. A dog looking around is curious. A dog scanning is computing. Rex 7 was computing. Sergeant First Class Danny Okafor was crossing the yard when he noticed her. He was 29, a former Army Ranger who'd taken a base coordination role after a knee injury ended his operational career. He'd seen all kinds come through Ridgeline special operators, intelligence consultants, foreign liaisons, contractors, who thought their last name was classified. He thought he had a feel for people by now. He looked at the woman once, then looked again. She wasn't tall. She wasn't broad-shouldered. She didn't carry herself with the exaggerated physical authority that most people tried to project in places like this. She carried herself like someone who had absolutely nothing to prove, which in Danny's experience was either the sign of someone dangerously naive, or someone so far beyond needing to perform that performance had become a foreign concept to them. He couldn't tell which yet. He crossed toward her. "Captain Vance." She turned. Her face was mid-30s, strong-featured, a faint scar at the edge of her left jaw that stopped just short of her chin. Her eyes were the kind of gray that looked silver in the right light, the kind of eyes that didn't blink too often, and when they did, you noticed it. "That's me," she said. "Sergeant Okafor. I'm your base liaison. I'll get you processed in and show you to your quarters." "Appreciate it." She shifted the duffel slightly. "What's the layout of the K9 yard?" "East side of the facility, about 400 meters. I can walk you over after." "I'll find it." She said it simply. Not rudely, just with the kind of certainty that didn't leave room for argument. Danny blinked. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment longer, assessing, Danny realized. Not sizing him up the way people do when they're looking for weakness. Sizing him up the way you do when you're deciding whether someone is someone. "You were Ranger," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. 75th. How'd you—" "The way you stand when you're giving information. Still briefing." She almost smiled. "Walk with me. You can do the processing later." The trouble started before she even reached the K9 yard. The contractors were finishing a close-quarters drill near the central exercise corridor when she passed through. 6 of them, Calloway's team. They were breathing hard, unwinding from the drill, passing a water jug between them, with the easy physicality of men who are very comfortable in their own skin. Rex 7 saw them before she rounded the corner. He didn't stop, didn't slow, but something in his gait tightened a millimeter of adjustment in his stride that Lara felt through the ground beside her more than she saw it. She noticed. She always noticed. Calloway was the first one to speak. "Hey." Flat. Loud enough to carry. "Hold up." She kept walking. "I said hold up." His voice went sharper this time, carrying the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed immediately. "This corridor is active. You need to reroute." Lara stopped. Not because she was told to. She stopped, turned, and looked at him with an expression so completely neutral it was almost unsettling. "Drill's over," she said. "I can see that." Calloway was a big man, 6'2", 220 pounds of maintained muscle, the kind of frame that had stopped a lot of conversations before they started. He looked at her the way men like him always looked at something that confused them, which was with narrowing eyes and a slow, confident smile that said, "You're going to figure out your mistake in a moment." "Who are you?" he said. "Captain Vance, K9 Integration." He looked at Rex 7 for the first time. The dog looked back at him. Something flickered in Calloway's face. A fraction, gone just as fast as it appeared. K9 Integration. He said it the way you'd repeat something that struck you as particularly funny. "We got a dog trainer." The men behind him reacted the way they were supposed to, with laughter, with that loose, dismissive energy that a team builds up when one of their own is performing. Lara didn't react. Not a flinch. Not a tightening of the jaw. Not a look away. She just waited, and that was the thing that should have warned him. Most people, even trained operators, show something when they're being laughed at in front of a group. Some micro-expression, some involuntary tightening, some glimmer of social discomfort. She showed nothing, because there was nothing to show. "You'll want to clear the corridor, Mr. Calloway," she said. He went still. "How do you know my name?" "I know everyone's name on this base," she said. "That's my job." She looked at him with that same flat, even gaze. "The corridor, please." The please was extraordinary, not because it was polite, because it sounded exactly like a warning dressed in a single syllable of courtesy. Calloway tilted his head. "You know what your problem is?" "I'm sure you'll tell me." "You're in a facility full of people who've been through things you couldn't imagine," he said, stepping slightly forward, not blocking her, not yet, just taking up space the way men like him did when they were warming up. "And you come in here with a dog and a clipboard and a rank that nobody can actually verify Because your file is so classified it might as well be written in invisible ink and you act like you belong here. A beat. That bother you? She said. What? That my file's classified. She tilted her head slightly. That bothers you. His jaw tightened. It bothers me that I don't know who you are, he said. And this is my facility. It's Colonel Dreyer's facility, she said, and I have orders signed by Naval Special Warfare Command that give me unrestricted access to every inch of it. She paused one beat. Now, the corridor. She turned and started walking. That was when the first one moved. Not. His name was Petrakis, broad, thick-necked, the kind of man who'd played college football and never fully lost the belief that his body was his primary argument in any situation. He stepped laterally into her path. Not violent, just present, just blocking. We're not done, he said. Rex 7 stopped. Not a flinch, not a defensive step back. He simply stopped, turned his body 45 degrees, and looked at Petrakis with those amber eyes. The look a chess player gives when they've just watched someone touch the wrong piece. Move, Lara said quietly. Ma'am, I think what Calloway's saying is, I know what he's saying. She looked at Petrakis directly now, not up at him, with the deliberate measured focus of someone who has looked at far more dangerous things than a large man in an exercise corridor and never once blinked. I've heard it many times before. Men who don't know who I am deciding that tells them something about what I am. She paused. It doesn't. Petrakis looked at Calloway. Calloway gave a small nod, and that was the moment. That small nod, that casual, comfortable signal between a man who'd never met her and his team, said everything about what they thought this situation was. They thought it was a performance. They thought she was performing confidence the way people do when they're bluffing. They thought she would break. Lara took a slow breath. Last chance, she said. 2 words. The yard went quiet. Something in the quality of the silence changed. Danny Okafor, standing 8 feet behind her, felt it before he understood it. A shift in the atmosphere. The kind of stillness that precedes something you can't take back. He'd felt it twice before in his life. Once in a convoy outside Mosul. Once in an alley in Kandahar. He took an involuntary step backward. Rex 7 didn't move, but his eyes changed. Or what? One of the men said from the back, young, trying to sound casual. The dog's gonna bite us. Laughter. Not confident laughter now. Slightly nervous laughter. The kind that gets a little too loud because somewhere in the body already knows. Calloway smiled. Lady, he said, we're former special forces, all 6 of us. Whatever you've got on paper, whatever your clearance level says out here, it doesn't. I didn't say the dog was going to bite you, Lara said quietly. A beat. I said last chance. Something in Calloway's face shifted. Just slightly. Just for a moment. And then Petrakis grabbed her arm. Thigh. What happened next took 4.5 seconds. People would argue about that number later. Some said it was 3 seconds. Some said 7. But the security footage reviewed 6 times by base investigators would confirm it 4.5 seconds. Petrakis grabbed her left arm. Rex 7 was already moving before the grip closed. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He moved with the clean, terrible efficiency of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. No excess, no rage, no performance of aggression. Just vector and impact and result. He hit Petrakis at the forearm, not the throat, not the face, not the hand. The forearm. A bite location that was specific and practiced and calculated to maximize leverage without causing the kind of injury that couldn't be walked back from. Petrakis went down, not slow, not stumbling, down. Move, Calloway shouted, and the training kicked in, the thing that Special Forces training does to men, that turns reaction into automatic response, and 2 of them came from the left side simultaneously. Lara had already stepped sideways, not away from them, into the gap between them, because she knew exactly where the gap was going to be. Rex left, she said. Not shouted. Said. Rex 7 pivoted. The man on the left went down before he completed his second step. Rex hold. Rex 7 stopped, planted, turned to face the remaining 4 with that ancient absolute stillness that was somehow more frightening than movement. Calloway's men hesitated. That hesitation was the story. 6 former Special Forces operators combined combat experience north of 40 years, and they hesitated because of a woman and a dog, because somewhere in the animal part of their brain, below training and ego and the certainty of their own capability, something recognized what it was looking at, and it said, "This is not what you thought it was." "Enough," Lara said. She wasn't breathing hard. That was the detail Danny Okafor couldn't get out of his head afterward, when he replayed the whole thing standing alone in his room that night. She wasn't breathing hard. She stood in the middle of 6 men, 2 down, 4 still standing the whole yard, electric with confused violence, and she stood like someone who had just finished filing paperwork. Like her heart rate had simply decided not to be interesting today. She looked at Calloway. Calloway looked at Rex 7. Rex 7 looked at Calloway. "Come on," someone behind Calloway said, a voice that had changed since the laughter 8 minutes ago. Quieter now. "Careful. Briggs, come on." But Calloway didn't move. And Lara watched him work through it. The decision, the calculus of a man whose entire identity was built on the certainty that he was the most dangerous person in any given room. She watched him get to the edge of that certainty and find something on the other side of it that he hadn't prepared for. "What are you?" he said. And it wasn't aggressive anymore. It was a genuine question. "I'm the person," Lara said quietly, "who is about to make your career very complicated, unless you walk away right now." A long beat. Calloway took 1 step back, then another. Then he turned and walked. Not ran. Calloway was not a man who ran. Walked back toward the far end of the yard without another word. His men followed. Danny Okafor let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding for the last 90 seconds. He looked at Lara. She was already crouching beside Rex 7, checking him over, running her hands along his legs, his flanks, checking his eyes. Methodical. Careful. "You okay, boy?" she murmured. The dog's tail moved. Once. A single deliberate wag like punctuation. She exhaled. "Good boy." Danny took a step forward. "Captain Vance," he said carefully. She looked up at him. "I think we need to go see Colonel Dreyer." She stood. "I know," she said. "I was expecting that." She paused, looking in the direction Calloway had gone. "What can you tell me about Calloway?" she said. Danny blinked. He runs the contractor security team, brought in 8 months ago. Dreyer trusts him." "Does Dreyer know what Calloway does when he thinks nobody's watching?" A long beat. "What do you mean?" She looked at him with those silver-gray eyes. "He didn't do that because he was threatened," she said. "He did that because he wanted to see if he could. Because he's been doing that here to people he thinks don't count for 8 months. She paused. "And nobody has told Dreyer." Danny's mouth opened slightly. She adjusted her duffel strap and nodded toward the main building. "Walk with me," she said, and Danny Okafor walked, because in that moment, it was the only thing that made sense, alongside a woman whose file was mostly black ink, and a dog whose eyes still hadn't fully released the men on the far end of the yard. Colonel Dreyer was at his window again when they arrived. He saw them coming from 50 meters out. He saw the way she moved, unhurried, deliberate, and he saw the controlled catastrophe behind her 2 men being helped to their feet by their teammates, the body language of an entire contractor unit, rearranged by something that had taken less than 5 seconds. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. His aide knocked. "Sir, Captain Vance is requesting to see you." "Send her in," he said. The door opened. She walked in. Rex 7 stayed just outside the threshold, a detail Dreyer noticed immediately. A combat-trained dog that held position on the threshold without a physical command. "Colonel?" "Captain Vance." He looked at her for a long moment. I'm going to guess that what I just saw through my window is about to require a significant amount of my afternoon. Probably, she said. 6 contractors. 6, she confirmed. In under 10 seconds. 4.5. He blinked. She waited. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand, sir. I want to talk to you about Briggs Calloway. Something shifted in Dreer's expression. He moved on someone, she said. On me. Which I was prepared for. But I don't think today was the first time he's moved on someone in your facility. And I think you should know that. The room got very quiet. Dreer set his hands flat on his desk. That's a serious accusation. I don't make accusations, she said. I make observations. The accusation is yours to investigate. He looked at her for a long time. Who are you? He said. The same question Calloway had asked, but from Dreer, it came from a completely different place. Not from threat, from genuine confusion. From a man who had been running an operation for 22 years and suddenly felt like he didn't quite have his footing. She met his eyes. I'm the person Naval Special Warfare Command sent, she said, to do a job. What job? A pause. That part, she said. I'm not authorized to tell you yet. Dreer stared at her. Outside through the window, the yard was still settling. Men standing in clusters, looking toward the main building. The contracted team forming a tight knot near the far barracks, Calloway at the center, his face unreadable from this distance. You know you've made enemies, Dreer said. I know, she said. Calloway won't let this go. I know that too. He has connections in this facility, outside it. He's not... Dreer stopped, chose his words. He's not someone who goes away quietly. She looked at the colonel with those silver-gray eyes, calm, certain carrying something in them that Dreer couldn't quite name. Something that looked less like confidence and more like inevitability. Neither am I, she said. Rex 7 stepped through the doorway, crossed the room quietly, sat down beside her. Neither of them looked at the dog. They didn't need to. Dreer looked at the 3 of them, the woman, the dog, and the weight of a classified file he still couldn't read. And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus Dreer felt like he was standing at the edge of something he hadn't anticipated. Something that had been set in motion long before Lara Vance pulled into his east parking lot. Long before Calloway's men blocked a corridor. Long before any of them knew her name. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Start from the beginning, he said. She looked at him. Which beginning? She said. He held her gaze. All of it, he said. She pulled out the chair, sat down, and Rex 7 settled quietly at her feet. Alert, steady, patient, as the afternoon darkened around the window, and somewhere across the yard, Briggs Calloway stood in the shadow of the barracks and watched the light in the colonel's office and began to plan. The legal pad stayed blank for a long time, not because Lara wasn't talking. She was. She sat across from Colonel Dreer in that gray afternoon light, and she spoke in the measured, economical way of someone who had spent years learning to say exactly as much as necessary, and not a single syllable more. But the things she said didn't fill paper. They filled the room. I was attached to DevGru in 2019, she began. Dog handler, then K9 tactical lead. We ran 3 overseas rotations, 2 in the Middle East, 1 classified location, I'm still not authorized to name. Rex 7 was assigned to me in late 2020. He wasn't new. He'd already had 2 handlers. Dreer's pen hovered over the pad. What happened to them? She looked at him directly. The first one was killed in action. The second one couldn't handle him. A beat. Couldn't handle him, how? Dreer said carefully. Rex wasn't a difficult dog, she said. He was an accurate dog. He did exactly what he was trained to do every time with total precision. The problem was that his second handler wanted him to do things he hadn't been trained for. Things that were outside protocol. She paused. Rex refused. Dogs don't just, Rex 7 isn't just a dog, she said quietly. That's what I need you to understand before we talk about anything else, Colonel. He's the product of a 4-year bilateral program between Naval Special Warfare and a classified DoD behavioral unit. The program was designed to develop K9 handlers and animals capable of operating in high-complexity environments without direct command, meaning the dog can assess threat level, prioritize targets, and make tactical decisions independently when the handler is incapacitated or out of communication. Dreer set the pen down. "You're telling me that dog makes independent combat decisions?" "I'm telling you he already did," she said. "This morning, in your yard." The room held that sentence for a moment. "I gave him left," she said. One word. Everything else he did, the positioning, the force calibration, the decision to hold rather than press, that was Rex. Dreyer leaned back in his chair. Outside, the yard had gone quiet. The afternoon had shifted into that heavy gray pre-dusk that the Pacific Northwest did like nowhere else on Earth, a dimming that felt less like the sun going down and more like the sky pressing closer. "Why are you here, Captain?" he said. She looked at him. "Because the program's being shut down," she said. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Dreyer picked up the pen, set it down again, looked at her like she'd just said something in a language he almost spoke. "Shut down," he repeated. "Defunded, restructured, and administratively dissolved," she said. "Effective 60 days from today. Rex 7 is the last active unit. The other 3 dogs in the program were retired or transferred out 8 months ago." She paused. "I was reassigned here too, and I want to use the exact language from my orders, facilitate the dignified transition and archival documentation of the K9 Tactical Integration Program." "That sounds like a burial," Dreyer said. "It is a burial," she said. "A very polite one." He studied her face. "And you're not going to let it happen," he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer that directly. What she said instead was quieter and in a way more revealing than anything else she'd told him. "Rex 7 saved 11 lives," she said, "documented. 3 of them on a single operation in circumstances I can't fully describe to you without a clearance you don't have. He's performed in conditions that no human operator could have survived, and he did it because of a bond and a training architecture that took 4 years and $3 million and the lives of people I cared about to build." She stopped. "And someone in a budget meeting decided it wasn't worth the paperwork." Dreyer looked at her for a long time. "Does Calloway know any of this?" Something changed in her expression. "Why would Calloway know?" "Because," Dreyer said slowly, "Calloway arrived on this base 8 months ago, the same month the other K9 units were pulled out." He looked at her steadily. "I thought that was a coincidence. I'm now wondering if I should stop assuming that." The room got very still. Rex 7 lifted his head from his position at Lara's feet, looked at the door. Across the base in this contracted security barracks, Briggs Calloway was on the phone. He wasn't using the base comm system. He was using a personal encrypted device, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and left no record on any network the base monitored. "She made contact with Dreyer," he said. The voice on the other end was smooth, unhurried. The voice of someone who managed problems from a very comfortable distance. "We expected that. She told him about the program." A pause. "How much?" "Enough. She's smart. She's not going to lay everything out in one sitting. She'll measure what she gives him." Calloway moved to the window. "But she's going to be a problem, Harmon. She's not here to file paperwork. Nobody sends a handler like her to file paperwork. She's there to buy time," the voice Harmon said. "She thinks if she can document the program's operational value on paper, she can make a case for reinstatement. She doesn't know the decision's already been made at a level where paper doesn't matter. So what do we do?" "Nothing violent," Harmon said immediately and firmly. "Nothing that touches her directly. She's flagged. If she reports an incident, it goes straight to Naval Inspector General. What we do is discredit. Quietly. Professionally. A beat. She had an incident today. 6 contractors, 1 woman, 1 dog. Make sure that story reaches the right people in the right version." Calloway's jaw worked. "You want me to flip the incident?" "I want you to contextualize it," Harmon said. "She arrived on a classified base, and her animal assaulted contracted personnel without provocation. The narrative writes itself if you let it." A long pause. "What about Dreyer?" "Dreyer trusts the chain of command. Give him enough doubt about her and he'll manage himself. And if he doesn't? The voice on the other end went quieter. Then we'll have a different conversation, Harmon said. Get it done, Briggs. The line went dead. Calloway looked at the window for a long moment. Then he called Petrakis. Danny Okafor found out about the report at 700 the next morning. He was pouring his second cup of coffee in the common room when Specialist Webb, 19 years old, still had that wide-eyed look of someone who hadn't yet learned that the things you overhear in military facilities are usually more important than the things you're officially told, sat down beside him and said very quietly, "Hey, you hear about the formal complaint?" Danny put the cup down. What complaint? Webb looked around. Calloway's team filed a report with base legal last night, against Captain Vance. He lowered his voice further. They're saying Rex 7 attacked unprovoked. 3 of them are claiming injury, one saying he might have soft tissue damage that'll affect his operational capacity. Danny stared at him. Are you serious? Signed and filed. Petrakis Gorman and a guy named Wick, all 3. Webb shook his head. They're calling it an unlawful use of a military K-9 asset against civilian contracted personnel operating in a non-combat training environment. The language was so precise and so legal and so completely inverted from what Danny had witnessed with his own 2 eyes that for a moment he couldn't speak. I was there, he said. I know. I saw what happened. I know that too. Webb leaned slightly forward. But you're the only one who was there who isn't one of them. And Calloway's team has 6 people telling the same story. And right now, you're one person telling a different one. Danny picked up his coffee, set it down again. Where's Captain Vance? K-9 yard. She's been there since 0500. Does she know? She knows, Webb said. Apparently she knew before the report was even filed. Danny looked at him. How? Webb shrugged, but there was something in his face that wasn't quite surprise. I don't know, man, but she didn't look shocked when the legal office notified her this morning. A beat. She looked like she'd been waiting for it. Memed. The K-9 yard at 700 was cold and sharp with the smell of damp earth and pine. Laura was running Rex 7 through a drill sequence that Danny had never seen before and couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't standard KNPV protocol, wasn't American Ring. Sport wasn't any of the military working dog training patterns he'd observed in his years of base coordination. It was something else. Faster. More complex. More conversational somehow, like the 2 of them were having a discussion in a language made entirely of motion and stillness, and 1,000 tiny signals that moved between them faster than thought. He stood at the fence line and watched for almost 3 minutes before she acknowledged him. Sergeant Okafor. Captain. He came through the gate. You heard. Last night, she said. She gave Rex 7 a release gesture, and the dog trotted to the far end of the yard, still alert, still scanning. Harmon moved faster than I expected. I'll give him that. Danny stopped. Harmon? Who's Harmon? She looked at him. You know Marcus Dreyer trusts his contractors, she said. Do you know why he brought in Calloway's team specifically? Budget directive. Outsourcing base security to private contractors. It's been happening across 6 facilities. It's been happening across the 6 facilities that were running classified experimental programs the DoD is trying to quietly wind down, she said. Ridgeline, Fort Everett, Camp Holt, Pendleton's Black Annex, all 6. All within a 9-month window. All with the same contracting firm. Danny's mouth opened slightly. Who's Harmon? He said again. Deputy Director of Program Review at the Defense Advanced Contracts Office, she said. He's the one who made the call to dissolve the K-9 integration program. He's the one who put Calloway here. And he's the one who signed off on the budget restructuring that killed the other 5 programs at those other 5 facilities. She watched his face as the shape of what she was describing became clear to him. He's not dissolving programs, Danny said slowly. No, she said. He's clearing the field. For what? She looked at him steadily. That's what I'm here to find out, she said. And that's why I need you to understand something, Sergeant. The report Calloway filed this morning is not the last move. It's the first. She paused. They are going to try to remove me from this base on paper in the most clean and legal way possible before I find out what I came here to find out. Danny exhaled. And what did you come here to find out? Rex 7 came back across the yard, sat beside her, patient, still. She looked at the dog for a moment. Rex 7's program produced something, she said quietly. A methodology. A training architecture that the DoD spent 4 years and $30 million developing. When the program was dissolved, all documentation was supposed to be archived and sealed. She met Danny's eyes. It wasn't. A beat. Meaning the documentation ended up somewhere it wasn't supposed to be, she said. Meaning someone tried to make it disappear not into a government archive, but into a private contracting framework. Meaning the program wasn't dissolved because it failed. She paused. It was dissolved because someone wanted what it produced and didn't want to share it with the Navy. The yard went very quiet. Danny Okafor looked at the dog, then at the woman, then at the gate beyond which the base carried on its ordinary, ordered, completely unsuspecting morning routine. "Captain," he said carefully, "what are you really doing here?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Rex and I were sent here to archive the program," she said. "Officially." She paused. "Unofficially, we were sent here because Naval Criminal Investigative Service needed someone inside this facility who Harmon didn't know was NCIS adjacent." She let that land. "And who he would underestimate." Danny felt the ground shift slightly under him. Not literally. Just the particular kind of shift that happens when you realize a conversation you thought you were watching from the outside is actually one you've been inside the whole time. "You're running an intelligence operation," he said. "I'm facilitating an investigation," she said carefully. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She almost smiled. It was the first time Danny had seen anything close to it, and it was small and brief, and it didn't reach her eyes, but it was real. He'd stake money on it being real. "The complaint Calloway filed this morning," she said, "is exactly what I needed him to file." Danny stared. "You wanted him to file a complaint against you." "I needed him to create a paper trail," she said, "because a complaint against me goes through base legal. Base legal documents it. That documentation becomes discoverable. And when NCIS pulls it..." She tilted her head slightly. "They also pull everything else that went through base legal in the last 8 months, including the contracting agreements Calloway's firm signed with this facility, including the addenda buried in the 3rd and 4th pages of those agreements." She paused. "Including the clause that authorizes the contracting firm to retain copies of any training methodology documentation developed or used on base property during the period of their service agreement." The silence stretched. "They wrote it into the contract," Danny said. "They wrote it into every contract," she said. "At all 6 facilities, small print, 3rd page, legal but buried, and nobody looked." She looked at Rex 7. "Nobody was supposed to look. Until you." "Until us," she said. Rex 7 sat perfectly still in the morning air, ears slightly forward, watching the gate to the yard with those ancient amber eyes. The call came at 900. Dreyer's aide appeared at the K9 yard gate and waved Danny over, then both of them over with the stiff urgency of someone carrying a message they didn't enjoy carrying. "Colonel wants you in the conference room," the aide said to Lara. "Base Legal is convening a preliminary review of the incident complaint. Calloway's team will be present." Lara looked at Danny. Danny looked at Lara. "All right," she said. She gave Rex 7 a short, quiet command, the same word 3 times spaced evenly, and the dog stood, shook himself once, and fell into step beside her without further direction. The aide looked at the dog. "Ma'am, the K9 may need to..." "Rex 7 is a classified military asset, and my operational partner," she said, not breaking stride. "He goes where I go. That's in my orders." The aide looked uncertain for about 1 second. Then he stepped aside. The conference room had 8 people in it when they arrived. Dreyer. At the head of the table, his face carefully neutral, the face of a man who has decided not to show his hand until he understands the table better. Base Legal Officer Captain Ewan. A small, precise woman with sharp eyes and the focused energy of someone who had trained herself to find the exact weight of every word in a room. Two JAG-adjacent advisors Danny didn't recognize. Calloway on one side of the table, Petrakis and Gorman flanking him, and a man Danny had never seen before sitting quietly at the far end, civilian clothes, no insignia, the practiced invisibility of someone who was used to being in rooms without being officially in them. Lara clocked all of it in the time it took her to cross from the door to her chair. Rex 7 positioned himself at her right side without being told. Dreer cleared his throat. Captain Vance, I want to say at the outset that this is a preliminary review, not a formal hearing. We're here to establish a factual record of yesterday's incident before any determination of next steps. Understood, she said. Captain Ewan set her notes on the table. Captain Vance, the complaint filed by contractor Calloway's team alleges that at approximately 1400 hours yesterday, your assigned K9 unit attacked 3 contracted personnel without warning or provocation, resulting in injuries that may constitute unlawful use of a military working animal in a non-combat environment. She looked up. Do you wish to respond to that characterization? Yes, Lara said. It's false. Calloway's jaw tightened. I have a statement from 6 witnesses, he began. You are not currently authorized to speak, Mr. Calloway, Captain Ewan said without looking at him. His jaw tightened further. Captain Vance, Ewan continued, can you describe the sequence of events as you experienced them? Petrakis physically grabbed my arm, Lara said. He initiated physical contact without warning or authorization. Rex 7 responded to a direct threat to my person, according to his training and protocol. The response was proportionate, controlled, and ceased immediately when I gave the command. She paused. Sergeant Okafor was present for the entirety of the incident. Every head in the room turned to Danny. He straightened slightly in his chair. That's accurate, he said. Petrakis made contact with Captain Vance. The K9 responded to that contact. The response was controlled. He paused. I would also note that prior to physical contact, the contracted team blocked Captain Vance's authorized path through a secured corridor without justification and made multiple derogatory comments directed at her rank and gender. A short silence. Calloway leaned forward. That's Mr. Calloway. Captain Ewan's voice had gone from sharp to surgical. One more interruption and I will ask you to leave. The man at the far end of the table, the civilian, the one nobody had introduced, shifted almost imperceptibly in his seat. Lara noticed. She looked at him. He didn't look back. That was telling. Most people in a room like this couldn't help looking back when someone looked at them. The social gravity of eye contact was almost irresistible. This man resisted it completely, which meant he'd trained himself not to react, which meant he wasn't a passive observer. She filed that. Captain Ewan, Lara said, I'd like to note for the record the presence of a civilian representative at this preliminary review. Could you identify him for the file? The room shifted. Dreer looked at the man. Captain Ewan looked at her notes. She paused. This individual was introduced to me as an oversight liaison from the Defense Contracting Review Office. His name, Lara said. Ewan looked at her notes again. Mr. R. Harmon, she said. The name hit the room like a stone into still water. Danny felt it a ripple, almost physical. He watched Calloway's face and saw something in it he hadn't seen yesterday. Not the confident dismissal, not the performed authority. Something more careful, something closer to concern. Because Calloway hadn't expected her to name Harmon. He'd expected her to not know Harmon was in the room. And the fact that she'd walked in and spotted him within 30 seconds, the fact that she'd already known and simply waited for the right moment to put his name in the official record, meant that something had just shifted in the game in a way Calloway hadn't prepared for. Lara looked at Harmon. Harmon looked at the table. Mr. Harmon, she said. I wasn't aware the Defense Contracting Review Office had oversight authority over K9 operational incident reviews. Harmon said nothing. Colonel Dreyer, she continued, turning to him, do you have documentation authorizing Mr. Harmon's presence at this proceeding? Dreyer looked at Harmon. A long beat. "No," Dreyer said slowly. "I don't." The room had gone very still. Captain Ewan set her pen down with the deliberate care of someone recalibrating every assumption she'd brought into the room. Calloway was completely motionless. Harmon finally looked up. His eyes found Laura's, and in them, just for a moment, just a sliver of a moment, was not the smooth professional distance of a bureaucrat in control of his situation. What was there was something rawer, something that recognized with perfect clarity that this woman had just done something he hadn't predicted. She'd put him on the record, by name, in a formal proceeding, in a room with a JAG officer and a legal transcript being generated in real time. He couldn't be erased from this now. Rex 7 shifted his weight almost imperceptibly beside her. She didn't look at the dog. She kept her eyes on Harmon. "I think," she said quietly, "that we should reschedule this review for a date when all parties can be properly identified and credentialed." She looked at Captain Ewan. "Don't you agree, Captain?" Ewan picked up her pen. "I think that's exactly right," she said. And somewhere behind the steady face of Briggs Calloway, the first thing that looked genuinely like fear began to take shape, because he'd built his career on reading rooms, and this room was telling him that the woman across the table hadn't walked into a trap. She'd built one, and he'd walked his own man straight into it. He looked at Laura. She didn't look at him. She was writing something on her notepad, calmly, methodically, with the unhurried focus of someone completing a task that was already mostly done. He looked at Rex 7. The dog looked back at him. Still, quiet, patient. The same way he'd looked at him in the yard yesterday, like something that had already calculated every possible version of this moment and found all of them acceptable. Calloway pushed back from the table. "We'll reschedule," he said, flat, controlled. The voice of a man who had just lost a battle and was already calculating the war. He stood. Petrakis and Gorman stood with him. Harmon rose, last straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door without a word, without looking at anyone, without the small social gestures that ordinary people make when they leave a room. He walked like a man who had already moved on to the next calculation. He paused at the door, didn't turn around. "Captain Vance," he said. She waited. "Welcome to Ridgeline," he said. He left. The door closed. Dreyer let out a slow breath. Danny Okafor realized his hands were pressed flat on the table and made himself relax them. Captain Yuen looked at Laura with the measured, careful expression of someone who has just dramatically revised her understanding of a situation. "Captain Vance," she said, "is there something I should know about what's happening on this base?" Laura capped her pen, set it on the notepad, looked at Ewan, then at Dreyer, then at Danny with those gray eyes that saw everything and gave back exactly as much as the moment required. "There's a great deal you should know," she said, "but some of it needs to come through channels you're going to have to trust me on." She paused. "What I can tell you right now is this. What happened in that yard yesterday was not an isolated incident. It was an opening move. And the man who just walked out of this room, the one who introduced himself as an oversight liaison, is not here to oversee anything." Dreyer leaned forward. "Then why is he here?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I am," she said, "and because Rex 7 is, and because whatever is buried in the contract amendments your base signed with Calloway's firm 8 months ago, someone very much does not want it seen." The room held that for a long, careful moment. Then Rex 7 stood stretched once and sat back down. The sun was fully up now beyond the windows. Another gray Pacific day pressing down on the base on the yard, on the 6 contractors who were walking back across it toward their barracks, with the particular silence of men who had just discovered that the game they thought they were running had been designed by someone else entirely. And in the conference room around a table that now held 4 people instead of 8, the real work was about to begin. Captain Ewan asked for an hour. She got everyone out of the conference room, the JAG advisors, the aide, the junior officer who'd been transcribing. And then she closed the door, sat back down at the table with Dreyer and Danny and Laura, and put both hands flat on the surface, the way a person does when they are about to commit to something they can't take back. "All right," she said, "talk to me." Laura looked at Dreyer first. He gave the smallest nod. The contracting agreement your base signed with Callaway's firm Vantage Operational Group has 4 addenda, Lara said. The first 3 are standard. Liability waivers, insurance protocols, non-disclosure agreements for base personnel, normal. She paused. The 4th addendum authorizes Vantage to retain operational documentation, training materials, and program methodology records developed or utilized on facility grounds during the active service period for purposes of contractor performance evaluation and internal capability development. Ewan stared at her. "That's theft," she said. "That's government intellectual property." "It's legal theft," Lara said. "Or close enough to legal that fighting it becomes an 18-month court battle that costs more than the program was worth, which is exactly the point. The language is vague enough to survive a first challenge. By the time it's litigated, the methodology is already integrated into their private framework, and they can argue it was independently developed." "How many facilities signed this?" Dreyer said. "All 6, she said. The same 4th addendum. Word for word. Because Harmon's office approved all 6 contracts." Danny had been quiet since Harmon left the room. He'd been doing the math, the slow grinding arithmetic of someone who keeps reaching the same answer and keeps hoping they added something wrong. "Harmon dissolved these programs," he said, "and then used the contractor agreements to legally absorb the methodology. And now those methods are in private hands." "Vantage Operational Group's hands," Lara said. "Yes. What is Vantage going to do with a classified K9 training methodology?" Lara looked at him, and in that look was the thing she'd been carrying since before she walked through Ridgeline's gate. The thing that had gotten her out of bed at 500 every morning for the past 4 months. The thing that had put her in that rental car on a gray Thursday morning with a classified dog and a canvas duffel, and 2 words, ready for the first man who thought she didn't belong. "They're already doing it," she said. No, the documents were on Lara's encrypted drive. She'd had them since 6 weeks before her transfer orders came through, pulled by an NCIS analyst named Torres, who'd been quietly running thread on Harmon's contracting decisions for 9 months before anyone in Naval Command took him seriously enough to attach operational support to his investigation. Torres had found the pattern. Lara was the pattern's next move. She spread the printed pages on the conference table, 43 pages, some of them still carrying the slight blur of a hurried scan, and watched Dreyer and Ewan and Danny read. Dreyer got 3 pages in and stopped. "This is a training roster," he said. "Vantage's internal program," Lara said. 8 dogs, 4 handlers, all trained using a methodology that is a near verbatim replication of the SEAL K9 integration protocol, the same protocol that produced Rex 7. Ewan looked up. "Where are these dogs deployed?" 3 are currently contracted to a private security operation in Eastern Europe, Lara said. 2 are assigned to a domestic protective services contract clients Vantage won't name. The remaining 3 are in advanced training. She paused. They are taking what took the Navy 4 years and $30 million to develop a system designed to operate in high-risk classified environments, and they are selling it. The word landed hard. Dreyer sat back. "They're selling military-grade K9 tactical units," he said, "to private clients. Without oversight, without accountability, without the legal and ethical framework that governs military working animal deployment." She looked at him steadily. "Whoever can pay Vantage's contract rate gets access to a system the U.S. Navy spent 4 years developing specifically because its capabilities exceed anything commercially available." Danny had gone very still. "This is why they needed the program shut down," he said quietly. "Not just for the methodology. If the program keeps running, if it keeps producing results, someone in Congress eventually notices. Someone asks questions about where the capability came from, and the paper trail leads back to Vantage and Harmon and every contract Harmon approved. So they kill the program," Ewan said. "And bury it so clean," Lara said, "that the only person left holding documentation is a reassigned handler on a base. Nobody's watching who they think is here to file papers and go home quietly." The room went very quiet. Rex 7 was positioned near the door. He hadn't moved in 40 minutes. But his ears shifted now a quarter turn, tracking something in the corridor outside, and Lara's eyes went to him immediately. She said nothing, but she watched him. What Rex 7 heard was Petrakis. Danny found out later, not from Lara, who never explained her dog in terms of what he detected, only what he did, but from the corridor camera footage that Captain Ewan pulled 2 days later. Petrakis had stood outside the conference room door for 11 minutes. Not moving, not knocking, just standing there in the corridor with his back against the opposite wall listening. But in that moment, what happened was simpler. Rex 7 looked at the door. Lara said, "Excuse me," stood cross to the door and opened it. Petrakis was 3 steps down the corridor, walking away with the too casual gait of someone who's been caught and is trying not to look like they have been. "Petrakis," she said. He stopped, turned. The expression on his face was the practiced blank of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. "Captain, how long were you in the corridor?" "Just passing through. The conference room is not on any standard route through this building," she said. "Try again." His jaw worked. "Calloway wanted to know," he started. "Calloway sent you to listen at the door," she said. "Not a question. Flat, clear. The way you say something when you want it understood that there is no version of this conversation where the lie survives." Petrakis looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened that she hadn't expected. His shoulders dropped, not dramatically, just a fraction, the particular physical deflation that happens when a person stops performing and arrives at something more honest. "He said you were going to damage the unit," Petrakis said. "That's what he told us. That you were here on a political mission to discredit private contractors and you'd burn anyone who got in your way." He paused. "That's what he said." Lara looked at him. "And yesterday," she said, "in the yard. What did he tell you then? That you needed to be tested?" He said it quietly, like the words had a different weight now than they'd had 24 hours ago. That if you couldn't handle 6 men in a corridor, you had no business being at this facility. The silence stretched. "You grabbed my arm," she said. "Yes." "Do you do that to every new arrival who needs to be tested?" He didn't answer. She stepped slightly closer. "Petrakis, before Vantage. What branch?" 82nd Airborne. "How long?" 8 years. "And you left for this." It wasn't contemptuous. She said it the way you ask a question when you genuinely want to understand how someone arrived somewhere they probably didn't intend. His jaw worked again. "Money," he said. "It's always money." "I know," she said. "It usually is." A beat. "The complaint you filed. The injury claim. Is there actual injury?" He looked at her. "Soft tissue bruising," he said. "Nothing that would have made it to an incident report 6 months ago. But Calloway told you to file." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment with those gray eyes reading him the way she read everything methodically, without urgency, finding the weight and measure of what was actually there. "Go back to your barracks," she said. "Don't tell Calloway you spoke to me." He blinked. "Why not?" "Because I'm going to need a witness," she said. "And you just decided which side of this you're on." She went back into the conference room, left him standing in the corridor with the particular expression of a man who'd come to eavesdrop and somehow ended up confessing. By that afternoon, 3 things happened that changed the shape of everything. The first, Captain Ewan submitted a formal request to Base Legal for the full text of all contract addenda signed between Camp Ridgeline and Vantage Operational Group in the past 18 months. She submitted it through JAG channels, which meant it was on record, and Harmon's office would be notified within 48 hours. The second, Danny Okafor went to the base communications room and pulled the encrypted satellite log for the past 7 days. Not the content of transmissions, just the routing data, the times, the frequencies. It was within his authority as base liaison. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it. 14 transmissions from a personal encrypted device registered to Ridgeline's contractor unit, all routed through a relay that didn't match any military network. He wrote down the relay identifier and brought it to Lara. She looked at it for 3 seconds. "That's Vantage's private comms infrastructure," she said. Calloway's been using it since day one, Danny said. Of course he has, she said. He's not just a contractor here, he's Harmon's eyes. Danny sat down. He was tired in the specific way of a person who's been running on adrenaline and coffee and the nauseating clarity of understanding what they're actually in the middle of. How do we move? He said. Ewan's request is going to flag Harmon. Calloway knows we're building something, and we're still on the base, still in his reach. We're in his reach, she said. He's in mine. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be accurate. She looked at him. The moment Calloway makes a direct move against this investigation, against me, against you, against the documents, it becomes federal interference. And federal interference is exactly what NCIS needs to escalate. So you're waiting for him to make a mistake? I'm waiting for him to make the specific mistake, she said. The one that crosses a line he can't explain away. Danny rubbed his face. And if he doesn't, if he's careful, she looked at him steadily. Briggs Calloway, she said, is not built for careful. He's built for pressure. And right now, the pressure is coming from both sides, from us, and from Harmon, who is going to be very angry when he sees Ewan's legal request come through. She paused. Men like Calloway make their worst decisions when they're being squeezed from two directions at once. Danny thought about that. You've dealt with people like him before, he said. I've dealt with exactly him before, she said. Different name, same architecture. Then she said something that Danny would think about later would turn over in the quiet of the weeks that followed and find new dimensions in every time. The most dangerous thing about men like Calloway, she said, isn't their violence. It's their certainty. They are absolutely certain that they are the most dangerous thing in any situation they enter, and that certainty makes them predictable. She looked at Rex 7. Rex has never been certain of anything. He assesses, every time, fresh. She paused. That's why they can't beat him. Rex 7 looked up at her. One slow blink. The third thing that happened that afternoon was this: Harmon called Calloway. Danny didn't hear the call, but Petrakis did. He was 3 feet from Calloway in the barracks hallway when the encrypted device buzzed and Calloway stepped away not far enough. Petrakis heard 3 sentences. He wrote them down on a piece of paper. He slid the paper under the K9-yard gate at 17:30. Lara found it when she came out to run Rex 7's evening drill. She unfolded it, read it, stood very still for a moment. Then she went inside and called Torres. Torres picked up on the first ring. He always did. Lara suspected he slept with his phone in his hand, though she'd never asked. Tell me something, she said. Harmon's office flagged Ewan's contract request within 2 hours. Torres said before she could say anything else. They're moving to block disclosure on national security grounds. They're citing national security for a base contracting agreement. I know. That's desperate, Torres said. Yes, that's what I'm reading it as, too. His voice tightened slightly. What happened? She read him the 3 sentences from Petrakis' note. A long silence. Say that again, Torres said. The second line. She read it again. Move the assets before Thursday, Torres said. He said that. Petrakis heard it clearly. Lara. Torres's voice changed. She'd known him for 3 years, and she could count on one hand the number of times she'd heard that particular tone from him, the one that meant the thing he was about to say was something he'd been hoping not to say. If he's moving assets before Thursday, that means the dogs, she said. He's going to relocate the 3 dogs in advanced training before any legal discovery can tie them to the methodology theft, Torres said. Once they're moved to a vantage facility outside NCIS jurisdictional reach. They're gone, she said. The physical evidence is gone. And without the dogs, the methodology theft is a paper argument, Torres said. Expensive, long, almost impossible to win. A beat. How long do we have? It's Monday evening, she said. He said Thursday. That's not long enough for me to get a federal warrant through the proper channels. I know. Lara. I know, Torres. A silence. What are you going to do? He said. She looked at Rex 7. The dog was watching her with those amber eyes, The eyes that assessed, that never assumed, that met every moment as a fresh calculation with no ego attached to the outcome. She thought about what she'd said to Danny. Men like Calloway make their worst decisions when they're being squeezed from two directions at once. "I'm going to squeeze," she said. Gag. She went to Dreyer that night, not to his office. To his quarters, a thing that violated every norm of professional distance on a base like this, the kind of thing that people noticed and talked about. She did it deliberately. She wanted Calloway's informants to see her going to the colonel's door at 2000 hours. She wanted them to wonder what was being said. Dreyer answered in civilian clothes, a coffee cup in his hand, with the expression of a man who was not surprised. "I've been expecting you," he said. "We have a problem with the timeline," she said. She told him about the assets, about Thursday, about Torres, and the warrant. He listened without interrupting, a quality she'd noticed in him from the beginning, and valued more the longer she spent in his facility. He was a man who understood that the most useful thing a person in authority could sometimes do was close their mouth and let information arrive. When she finished, he set down the coffee. "What do you need from me?" he said. "I need you to call Vantage's base operations manager tomorrow morning," she said. Official channel. "As the base commander, requesting a routine audit of contracted personnel operational logs for the past 60 days. He looked at her. "A routine audit will take days to comply with." "The request isn't the point," she said. "The request creates paper. It creates official documentation that as of Tuesday morning, the base commander of Camp Ridgeline initiated an audit of Vantage's operations. That document exists in the federal record." She paused. "Which means if Calloway moves assets after that document exists, if he does anything that could be construed as obstructing or anticipating that audit, it's no longer a contracting dispute." "It's obstruction," Dreyer said. "And obstruction I can work with," she said. "Obstruction Torres can work with." Dreyer looked at her for a long moment. "You're running this from both ends," he said, pulling Calloway toward a mistake while building the record underneath him. "Yes. And if he figures it out before Thursday?" She met his eyes. "He won't," she said. "Because to figure it out, he'd have to believe that a woman with a dog who arrived 3 days ago could have set this up." She paused. "And he has already told himself a story about who I am. That story is the cage." Dreyer picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it down again. "My daughter wants to be in the Navy," he said out of nowhere. Lara waited. "She's 17, smart, stubborn." He looked at Lara with the steady gaze of a father trying to hold two thoughts at once. "I've been worried about what she'd face." A beat. "Don't be," Lara said quietly. "Teach her to be accurate." He looked at her. "Like your dog," he said. "Like my dog," she said. He nodded once. "I'll make the call at 0800, he said. "Anything else?" "One more thing," she said. "Petrakis, he's going to be a witness. I need him protected from Calloway for the next 48 hours. "I can reassign him to administrative duties under my direct supervision," Dreyer said. "Calloway won't like it." "No," she said. "He won't." She turned to go. "Captain Vance," Dreyer said. She stopped. "The program," he said. "Rec 7's program. Do you actually think you can save it?" She stood in his doorway for a moment. Rec 7 was in the corridor behind her, patient, dark, quiet. "I think," she said carefully, "that what the program built is worth saving. Whether I save the program itself." She paused. "That depends on what happens in the next 48 hours. She left. Dreyer stood at his closed door for a long time after she was gone, holding a cup of cold coffee and thinking about accuracy. It was Calloway who came to her. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected him to work through intermediaries another legal complaint, another surrogate move, another carefully distanced action that preserved his cover. What she had not expected was for him to appear at the K9 yard at 21:30, alone in civilian clothes, and stand at the gate until she acknowledged him. She turned. He stood in the gap of the gate, hands open at his sides, deliberately visibly, the way operators signal non-aggression, a gesture so trained it was almost a tell. "I want to talk," he said. Rex 7 was at her left side. He didn't move toward Calloway, but his attention narrowed that amber-eyed focus that was somehow worse than movement, somehow more serious than aggression. "Then talk," she said. He came through the gate slowly, stopped at a respectful distance further than he needed to, which told her something. He was managing the dog's perception of him. He'd observed Rex 7 enough in the past 48 hours to know that rapid approaches were a bad idea. He was learning. That was interesting. "The report from Petrakis and the team," he said. "It can be withdrawn." She waited. "You made a point this morning," he said. "In the conference room. You put Harmon's name on record. I understand what that means." He paused. "I want you to understand something too." "I'm listening." "I didn't know what I was walking into when I took this contract," he said. She looked at him. "That's not true," she said. His jaw tightened. "Calloway, you are former Special Forces with the operational intelligence to vet a contract before you sign it. You knew Harmon. You knew Vantage. You knew what the base assignment was designed to accomplish." She held his gaze. "What you didn't know was me." A long silence. Something moved in his face. Something she hadn't seen there before. Something that was neither arrogance nor aggression. It was older and quieter and considerably more honest than anything he'd shown in the yard 2 days ago. "What happens to my team?" he said. "If this goes where you're taking it?" "That depends entirely on what your team did and what they're willing to say about who told them to do it. And me." She looked at him steadily. "That depends on what you do in the next 48 hours, she said, "and how much you know about where those dogs are being moved." The silence that followed was different from any silence they'd shared so far. Because he didn't deny it. He didn't perform confusion or outrage. He stood in the K9 yard at 21:30 on a Monday night, and he looked at a woman he'd tried to humiliate 3 days ago, and he did not deny knowing about the dogs. Which meant she'd been right about everything. Rex 7 made a sound, not a growl. Something quieter and more complicated, a low sustained note that seemed to come from deep in his chest and meant nothing specific and everything general. The sound a dog makes when it is waiting for a human to decide. Calloway looked at the dog. "He's remarkable," he said, quietly, almost to himself. "Yes," she said. "The second handler," Calloway said. "The one who couldn't work with him." He looked at her. "Do you know why he really left?" Everything in her went still. "Tell me," she said. Calloway looked at her with the expression of a man standing at a door he's been leaning against for a long time and has just decided to open. "Because Harmon sent him," he said, "to the program, from the beginning. His whole assignment was to document the methodology and build a relationship with Rex 7 close enough to replicate the handler bond in a private setting." He paused. Rex 7 refused him, every time, for 7 months. The dog would not form the bond he'd work with the man on basic protocols, but the deep integration, the command-independent decision-making Rex wouldn't give it. Another pause. Harmon's man told him it was because Rex was defective, that the program had failed to produce a fully functional unit. Lara's jaw was tight. "But that's not why," she said. "No," Calloway said quietly. "Rex just knew." The yard was completely still. She stood in the dark with a man she'd been building a case against for 3 days, and a dog who had apparently spent 7 months quietly refusing to give a spy access to something that couldn't be stolen, and she understood in a way that hit somewhere below thought that Rex 7 had been protecting this program long before she arrived, long before any of them saw the shape of what was happening. "The 3 dogs in advanced training," she said. Her voice was very even. "Where are they being moved?" Calloway looked at her. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out. She took it, unfolded it. An address, a facility name, a date. Wednesday, not Thursday. Harmon had moved the timeline up. She looked at Calloway. "He changed the date," she said. "This afternoon," Calloway said, "after your conference room." She looked at the paper. 41 hours. "Why are you giving me this?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who'd put his team on the ground in 4.5 seconds, who'd put Harmon's name on a legal transcript, who'd built a case on a base she'd arrived at 3 days ago, who stood in front of him in the dark, with a dog that had seen through a trained intelligence operative in 7 months and given him nothing. Because, Calloway said quietly, I spent 12 years in the Army believing I was serving something real. And I'd like to go back to believing that before I don't have the option anymore. Rex 7 sat down. Not a wary sit, not a watchful sit, a settled one. Like something had been decided. Lara looked at Calloway for a long moment. Then she looked at the address. Then she called Torres. Torres said 3 things in rapid succession. The address is real. The facility is registered as a Vantage Training Annex in rural Oregon, 2 hours from your position. I've confirmed vehicle movement consistent with asset transport scheduled for tomorrow night. A pause. And Lara. There's something else at that facility. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. Tell me. 6 weeks ago, Vantage ran a private protective operation for a corporate client in Portland. High-value individual credible threat profile, they deployed one of the K-9 units from the advanced training group. Torres's voice had that particular tightness. She recognized the sound of a man who has looked at something he can't unsee. The dog misidentified a target. A civilian, man named Gerald Hoffman, 63 years old, retired schoolteacher. Wrong place, wrong car, wrong profile match. He stopped. He's alive, but he spent 4 days in the hospital. Broken arm lacerations, significant psychological trauma. Lara stood in the dark K-9 yard and held that. The dog misidentified him, she said. Because the training was incomplete, Torres said. They replicated the methodology structurally, but they didn't build the behavioral calibration phase, the part that teaches independent threat assessment. They gave a dog the capability without the judgment. His voice went flat. Which is exactly what the program notes warned would happen if anyone tried to replicate the system without the full 4-year integration cycle. Harmon knew, she said. Harmon's legal team paid Hoffman a settlement 3 days after the incident. ND as signed. Medical bills covered. The whole thing buried under a corporate liability clause that was specifically designed to prevent the incident from being reported to any regulatory body. Torres exhaled. He didn't just steal the methodology, Lara. He deployed it carelessly and then paid to make the damage disappear. Calloway was still standing at the edge of the yard. He'd heard enough, her face told him enough, and the expression that crossed his was not shock. It was the particular grimness of a man who suspected and now knows. You knew about the incident, she said to him, not into the phone, directly at Calloway. He looked at the ground. I heard something, he said. I didn't know the details. But you suspected. A long pause. Yes, he said. She looked at him for 3 full seconds, then back to the phone. Torres, the warrant. I need the facility address and confirmation of the asset movement to file for emergency discovery. With what Calloway gave you, I can get a federal judge on the phone tonight, but I need something on paper tying Harmon directly to the Hoffman cover-up. The settlement documents, she said. If I had them. Dreher's audit request, she said. Submitted through JAG tomorrow morning. That request legally compels Vantage to produce all operational records for the past 18 months, including contracts, including payments. She thought fast. If UN files the audit request simultaneously through base legal, it creates a parallel compulsion, 2 separate legal demands hitting Vantage's records at the same time through different channels. They can't block both fast enough. Torres was quiet for a moment. That's actually going to work, he said. Call me in 2 hours, she said. She hung up, looked at Calloway. I need you to write a statement, she said. Everything you know, everything Harmon told you, asked you, instructed you, every communication, starting from when he first contacted you about this contract. Calloway nodded slowly. And my team, he said. Tell them the truth, she said. Let them decide, but do it tonight. He looked at Rex 7 one more time. The dog looked back at him without malice, without warmth, just that clean measuring attention. I'm sorry, Calloway said, for the yard. I know, she said. She said it the way you accept something that's already in the past, not dismissing it, not forgiving it in the theatrical sense, just placing it where it belonged and moving forward. He left. She looked at Rex 7. 41 hours, she said. Rex 7 stood up. Yo, she didn't sleep. She sat at the small desk in her assigned quarters with the 43 documents and Calloway's piece of paper and her own notes, and she built the case the way she'd been trained to build things from the ground up, load-bearing first, nothing decorative, until the structure was sound. At midnight, Danny knocked. She opened the door, and he looked at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him about the Hoffman incident in 4 sentences. He sat down on the edge of the desk chair. "A civilian," he said. 63 years old, she said. And Harmon paid it away, in 72 hours, before any regulatory body could be notified. She looked at him. "This stopped being an intellectual property case, Danny. This is criminal negligence and obstruction, and a federal cover-up of a civilian injury caused by an improperly trained military-grade asset." She paused. "Which means NCIS doesn't just want Harmon's contracts anymore. They want Harmon." Danny rubbed his face. "What do we need to do tonight?" "I need you to do something that is technically within your authority as base liaison, but is going to feel like it isn't," she said. "I need you to access the base's official communications archive and pull every message between Dreyer's office and Vantage's operations manager for the past 8 months." He looked at her. "That's a legitimate liaison function," he said carefully. "Yes. But if Calloway has an informant in the communications room, do it from Dreyer's terminal," she said, "with Dreyer present. That way it's on the record as a command-level review, not a liaison access." He stood up. "I'll call Dreyer," he said. "I already did," she said. "He's waiting for you." Danny looked at her. "How long have you been running this?" he said. Not accusatory, genuine. She met his eyes. "Since before I got here," she said. "But the last 48 hours," she paused. "That part was you. And Dreyer, and Petrakis." She said it simply, without performance. "I couldn't have built this without people who decided to be honest." Danny picked up his jacket, stopped at the door. "The program," he said. "Rex 7's program. If we get through this, if the evidence holds, and Torres gets his warrant, does the program come back?" She looked at the dog. Rex 7 was stretched on the floor beside the desk, not sleeping, just resting with the efficient stillness of an animal that understood how to conserve for what was coming. "That's not up to me," she said. "But do you believe it should?" A long pause. "I believe Rex 7 spent 7 months refusing to give a spy access to something that was worth protecting," she said quietly. "And I think that answers the question better than I can." Danny left. The night settled around her, and the dog and she worked. At 600, Harmon made his move. She heard it from Ewan, who called her cell at 6:07, with a voice that was carefully controlled in the way of someone delivering news they find personally offensive. "I've just been served with a command-level directive from the Office of Defense Contract Oversight," Ewan said. "Signed by Harmon. Citing Section 14C of the DoD Contractor Security Protocol, it authorizes the removal of non-essential classified asset personnel from a contracted facility when their presence constitutes a credible risk to contractor operational security." Laura set down her coffee. "He's trying to remove me from the base," she said. "He has 12 hours to enforce it," Ewan said. "Meaning by 1800 today, you are required to vacate Camp Ridgeline with Rex 7 and surrender all operational documentation to the base legal office for archival." A pause. "Which would then become subject to the Contractor Records Retention Clause in the Vantage Agreement." "The documents." He was trying to take the documents. "Can you block it?" she said. "I filed an immediate counter-challenge through JAG the moment I read it," Ewan said. "But Laura, his authority here is legitimate. He has a standing directive, and the section he's citing has been used before. It takes 24 to 48 hours for a JAG challenge to be heard." Her voice tightened. "He knows the timing. He's not trying to win the legal argument. He's trying to run out the clock." Laura stood very still. The mathematics were brutal and exact. Harmon's removal order gave him until 1800. The dogs were moving Wednesday night now, less than 36 hours away. If she was off the base by 1800 with her documents seized, Torres lost his on-the-ground witness and his physical evidence simultaneously. It would be over. "Ewan," she said. "The audit request." Dreer was filing it at 0800. "He filed it at 0730, Ewan said, "the moment I told him about the removal order. He wanted it on record before Harmon could argue the investigation was initiated after the removal directive." A beat. "But Lara, the removal order supersedes the audit request in terms of my immediate authority. I can fight it in writing, but I can't physically stop." "You don't have to stop it," she said. A pause. "What?" "File the challenge, document everything, and then let me work." She paused. "How long can you legitimately delay processing the removal order through base administrative channels?" Ewan was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Processing a command-level directive of this complexity through proper base legal channels," she said slowly, "could reasonably require a thorough administrative review that might take conservatively 6 to 8 hours to complete. Then start the review," Lara said. "Now." "Understood," Ewan said. The line went dead. Rex 7 was already on his feet. She found Dreyer in his office at 0640 with the expression of a man who has been awake since before she called him. "He's good," Dreyer said before she sat down. "I'll give him that." "He's desperate," she said. "There's a difference. Good people don't get desperate." She sat. "The audit request is filed." 0730, JAG timestamped. He pushed a copy across the desk. "I also sent copies to 2 separate JAG offices and to the base inspector general, so there's no single point of suppression." She looked at him. "That was smart," she said. "I had help," he said. He meant Danny. She could tell from the small shift in his expression. "Okafor found something in the communications archive last night." She waited. 14 communications between Calloway's encrypted device and a relay that traces to Vantage's private network, Dreer said. "But the last 3, sent in the past 48 hours, include message headers that identify a secondary recipient." He slid another sheet across the desk. She looked at it. The secondary recipient was an internal DoD routing address. She looked at the address for a long moment. "That's not Harmon's office," she said. "No," Dreer said. "It's not." She looked up at him. "That's Congressional Liaison," she said. "Office of the Senate Armed Services Committee," Dreyer said. "Specifically a staffer attached to the Subcommittee on Defense Contracting Oversight." The room went very quiet. "Harmon has someone inside the committee," she said. "Someone who has been receiving updates on Vantage's operations, including presumably this investigation, and filtering what reaches the subcommittee members." Dreer's voice was completely level. The level of a man who has processed his outrage and arrived at something colder and more functional. Which means every time anyone in the committee asked questions about defense contracting irregularities in the past 8 months, someone was telling Harmon in advance. Lara sat back. This was the thing she hadn't known. This was the piece that explained why Torres's investigation had moved so slowly. Why every time NCIS thought they had a clear path, the path narrowed. Someone had been watching from the inside. "We need that routing information in Torres's hands in the next 2 hours, she said. "Already sent," Dreyer said. "Encrypted, through a channel Harmon doesn't know I have." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the steady, undecorated gaze of a man who had been running a classified facility for 22 years and had decided sometime in the past 48 hours exactly whose side he was on. "Colonel," she said, "thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We still have a removal order with your name on it." "Hui," Torres called at 0900. His voice was different still. Tight, still controlled, but underneath it was something that sounded almost like momentum. "The routing information Dreyer sent," he said. "I know the staffer. His name is Marsh. He's been on the committee for 6 years. I've had a flag on him for 3 months for a completely separate reason." A beat. "Lara, this is bigger than Vantage." "How big?" "Harmon's contracting manipulation isn't a single operation," Torres said. "Vantage is one firm. but the pattern dissolve a classified program, insert a contractor with a records retention clause, absorb the methodology into private commercial use. That pattern has happened across 4 different contractors in the past 3 years, each one with a different program, different capabilities. She felt it the widening of the thing she'd been looking at, like standing back from a wall and realizing it was the side of a building. K9 was one program, she said. One of 4, Torres said. The other 3 involved autonomous systems monitoring protocols, advanced interrogation resistance training, and he stopped. Lara, one of them was a counter-surveillance methodology developed specifically to protect undercover Navy intelligence operatives in hostile environments. The silence was absolute. If that's in private hands, active operatives could be compromised, Torres said. Yes, I know. Another pause. I have a federal judge on the phone in 40 minutes. I need every piece of documentation you have. Callaway's statement, the audit filing, the routing data, the settlement records from Hoffman, all of it in my hands digitally in the next 30 minutes. You'll have it in 20, she said. She hung up, looked at Rex 7. This is it, she said to the dog. He looked back at her with those amber eyes, calm, certain, ready. She sent the files. At 1100, Callaway came to Dreyer's office. Not alone. He came with Petrakis, and behind Petrakis came 3 more members of his team. Gorman, a man named Vasquez, and the youngest of them, the one who'd said, "Or what the dog's gonna bite us in the yard" 2 days ago. His name was Ellison, 26. Still had something uncalculated in his face. Callaway put a USB drive on Dreyer's desk. Statement, he said. Mine and theirs. He nodded at the men behind him. Everything Harmon communicated to us about this assignment. What we were told, what we were asked to do, what we suspected and didn't report. He looked at Dreyer steadily. We're requesting to make formal statements to JAG. Dreyer looked at the drive, at Callaway, at the 4 men behind him. What about the remaining 2, he said. Your team has 6. The remaining 2 have already contacted Vantage's legal counsel, Callaway said quietly. I can't speak for them. A beat. You understand what this means for your contract, Dreyer said. Yes, sir, Callaway said. Your security clearances will be reviewed. Yes, sir. Vantage will likely terminate. Colonel, Callaway said. Not cutting him off, just stopping him from saying things that had already been understood and processed. We know. Dreyer picked up the drive, looked at it for a moment. Sergeant Okafor, he said to Danny, who was standing in the doorway. Get Captain Ewan, now. At 1340, Torres called again. He didn't say anything for 3 full seconds. She waited. The warrant cleared, he said. She exhaled. The judge signed it at 13:15. Federal marshals are en route to the Vantage facility in Oregon. They'll arrive before any asset movement tonight. He paused. And Lara Jag has formally suspended Harmon's removal order pending a federal investigation into the exercise of his directorial authority. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. The dogs, she said, the 3 in advanced training, will be taken into federal custody pending determination of their status, he said, which gets complicated because their training is technically based on a methodology that belongs to the U.S. Navy, which means they're Navy assets, she said. A JAG officer is arguing exactly that position as we speak, Torres said. And the Hoffman settlement, the NDA, the liability waiver, all of it is being reviewed for obstruction. Gerald Hoffman has been contacted. His attorney has already indicated he intends to cooperate fully with federal investigators. She stood in Dreyer's outer office with the phone against her ear and felt the weight of the past 4 days settle and redistribute, not lifting exactly, not disappearing, but finding the shape of something that could be carried. Harmon, she said. His office has gone quiet, Torres said, which means his lawyers are already in the room. A beat. We'll have him within the week. She leaned against the wall. Rex 7 pressed himself against her leg, not pushing, just there, the warm, solid, constant presence of an animal who had been beside her through every moment of this and had never once lost his footing. She put her hand on his head. He leaned into it. Torres, she said. The congressional staffer, Marsh. Being interviewed this afternoon by Senate Ethics Committee investigators, he said. The Armed Services Committee chair was personally notified at noon. She is... He paused, and she could hear in his voice something close to satisfaction, not pleased. No, she said. I wouldn't imagine. Lara. Torres's voice shifted. You need to know the Hoffman case is going to get attention. When this breaks publicly, the story is going to be about a civilian who was hurt by an improperly trained military-grade K-9 used by a private contractor. He paused. The program is going to be in that story. Rex 7 is going to be in that story. People are going to ask hard questions. I know, she said. It could go either way for the program, he said. Public exposure of the methodology theft is good. But public exposure of what a compromised version of the program did to an innocent man. I know Torres. I just want you prepared. I am prepared, she said. I've been prepared since the day they tried to bury it. She hung up, looked at Rex 7. It's going to get loud, she said quietly. He looked back at her. That single deliberate blink. At 16:10, 40 minutes before Ewan's administrative delay on the removal order would expire, a notification came through Dreyer's JAG channel. Harmon's removal directive had been formally suspended. Dreyer read it twice. Then he walked to the doorway of his office where Lara was sitting with Danny and Ewan and the USB drive and 4 hours of documentation work, and he said simply, "You're staying." Danny let out a breath that seemed to have been building since Thursday. Ewan set her pen down and pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at the ceiling for one moment, a gesture so uncharacteristically unlegal that it made Lara want to smile. Rex 7 stood up, turned a small circle, and sat back down. Okay, Danny said. Okay. He ran a hand through his hair. So what happens now? Now, Lara said, the federal marshals secure the facility in Oregon. Torres runs the investigation. JAG processes the statements, and we do the unglamorous part, which is, we document everything she said, every statement, every communication, every contract addendum and settlement record and routing address. Completely and thoroughly and correctly, so that when this goes in front of a federal prosecutor, there is nothing that can be challenged, nothing that can be softened, and nothing that gives Harmon's lawyers a single loose thread to pull. She looked at Ewan. I'm going to need you for a long time tonight, she said. I've worked longer, Ewan said. She picked her pen back up. Start from the beginning. The audit request, Lara said. Walk me through exactly what it covers and what it compels. And they worked. Outside the base, settled into its early evening rhythm, the sounds of men and machinery and a facility doing the ordinary business of ordinary days. But in Dreyer's conference room, around the same table where Harmon had sat 3 days ago and tried to be invisible, 4 people and 1 Belgian Malinois were building something that couldn't be made invisible, couldn't be settled, couldn't be buried in an NDA or dissolved in a budget memo. Rex 7 lay on the floor beside Lara's chair. His breathing was slow and even. His eyes were open. He was still watching the door. At 1900, Petrakis knocked. He came in without being asked which was forward, but nobody said anything, because the look on his face was the specific look of a man carrying something he needs to put down. He stood in the middle of the room. I wanted to say something to Captain Vance, he said. Lara looked at him. In the yard, he said. When I grabbed your arm. I want you to know that wasn't. He stopped. Started again. I've been doing this job for 8 months. Following orders I should have questioned. Telling myself it was contract work, just professional, just business. He looked at her directly. And then you walked in, and in 48 hours you did what I should have done 8 months ago. She looked at him for a long moment. Why didn't you? She said. Not harsh. Genuine. He thought about it honestly. Because Calloway was certain, he said. And when someone's that certain, it's easier to follow than to think. She nodded slowly. That's the most honest answer anyone has given me in a long time, she said. He stood there for a moment longer, like a man deciding whether that was enough. Is there something I can do, he said, tonight, to help? She looked at Ewan, who was buried in documents, at Danny, who was cross-referencing communication logs, at Dreyer, who was on the phone with JAG for the third time in 2 hours. Then she looked at Petrakis. You type, she said. He blinked. Yes, ma'am. Sit down, she said. Ewan give him the Vantage addenda. He can start cross-referencing the dates against the asset movement records. Ewan slid the papers across the table without looking up. Petrakis sat down, picked up a pen, started reading. Rex 7 looked at him once, then looked away back to the door, back to his patient, inexhaustible vigil, and the room filled with the sound of work being done by people who had found through various and complicated routes which side of a line they were on. And for the first time since she'd pulled into the east parking lot 4 days ago, Lara Vance let herself think, not plan, not calculate, but simply think about what came after. What it might look like, what Rex 7 might look like in it. She didn't let herself think too long. There was still too much between here and after. But she thought it, just for a moment. She thought it. Torres called at 2140. The documentation work had been going for nearly 3 hours. The conference room smelled of cold coffee and paper and the particular exhausted focus of people who have been operating on will and necessity for days. Danny was on his second notepad. Ewan had taken off her jacket for the first time. Petrakis hadn't looked up from the cross-referencing in 40 minutes. Lara answered on the first ring. Tell me, she said. Federal marshals secured the Oregon facility at 2108, Torres said. No resistance. Vantage's on-site personnel complied immediately. A pause that carried weight. 1 dog was present and secured. The other 2 were gone. She closed her eyes. How long ago? Vehicle left the property approximately 3 hours before marshals arrived, Torres said. Someone tipped them. Not Calloway, the timeline doesn't match. Someone inside the federal process. Marsh, she said. We think so, Torres said. Senate Ethics is already pulling his communications for the past 72 hours. But Lara the dog, they recovered. A male, Malinois 26 months. He was in a transport crate, sedated, ready to be moved. He stopped. The sedation was administered about 2 hours before the marshals arrived, which means whoever was still on site decided to sedate the dog rather than move him. Why? Because Torres said he wouldn't load. She stood very still. The dog refused to get in the vehicle, Torres said. The on-site handler, a Vantage employee, tried 4 times according to the witness statements from Vantage's own personnel. The dog would not comply. He wasn't aggressive. He just stopped, planted. Wouldn't move for this person no matter what was tried. Another pause. They sedated him because it was the only way they could transport him. But by the time they were ready to move, the marshal's timeline had caught up. Danny had stopped writing. Ewan had looked up. Petrakis was watching her face. The behavioral calibration, she said. It's in the federal report now, Torres said. The dog retained the selective compliance protocol from the original methodology, the part that trains the animal to bond specifically and not to extend full operational compliance to unverified handlers. Vantage replicated the capability without replicating the calibration exactly as you said, which means even their partially trained dog retained enough of the ethical architecture to refuse an instruction it assessed as wrong. She exhaled. That's our evidence, she said. That's more than evidence, Torres said. That's testimony. A dog that refused to be weaponized. A beat. The Senate Armed Services Committee chair was briefed 20 minutes ago. She wants a full subcommittee hearing within the week. His voice shifted. Lara, she asked for you. The room absorbed that for a moment. Danny set his pen down slowly. The Senate, he said. She's going to testify before the Senate. The subcommittee, Ewan corrected automatically, then looked at Lara. The Armed Services Committee Subcommittee on Defense Contracting Oversight. She paused. That's significant. The 2 dogs that were moved, Lara said into the phone. Where are they? We're tracking the vehicle, Torres said. GPS data from the Oregon facility's security system gave us a partial route. We have state police coordinating in 2 counties. We'll find them. They're assets, she said. They need to be handled by someone who knows what they are when they're recovered. Not just anyone. A beat. I know, Torres said. I want to be there when they're found, she said. A longer beat. I'll make sure you're on the call, Torres said. Get some sleep, Lara. She looked at the room full of people who had not slept. Sure, she said. She hung up, looked at Danny. The dog refused, he said quietly. Yes, she said. Because of how Rex was trained. Because of what the program built, she said. Even in an incomplete version. Even in a system that stripped out everything inconvenient. She sat down slowly. They thought they could take the weapon and leave the ethics behind. They couldn't. She looked at Rex 7. Because the ethics aren't separate. They're structural. You remove them, and you don't get a better weapon. You get a broken one. The room was very quiet. Petrakis was looking at the table. That's why Rex wouldn't work with Harmon's man, he said. Not a question. He was putting it together in real time, and she watched him do it, the pieces arriving and connecting in the face of a man who was learning that the things he'd dismissed had been protecting something he hadn't understood. Rex 7 assessed him as an unverified handler, she said. Every time. For 7 months. She paused. The program created dogs that can tell the difference between someone using them and someone working with them. Harmon's man couldn't pass that test. And instead of understanding what that meant, Harmon told himself the dog was defective. She looked at Rex 7. Rex wasn't defective. Rex was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. Rex 7 looked back at her. One slow blink. Dreer had been standing in the doorway. She hadn't heard him return from his JAG call. He stood there with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has just finished watching something he'll describe to people for the rest of his life. The Senate wants this, he said. Yes. The full story, the program, the theft, the Hoffman incident, the methodology, the dogs. He paused. They want Rex 7. They want what he represents, she said. Is there a difference? She thought about that for a moment. There will be, she said. Ying. The next 72 hours moved like a river in flood, fast and relentless, and carrying everything with it. Tuesday morning, JAG formally received 5 signed statements from Calloway and 4 members of his team. Calloway's statement alone was 11 pages. It detailed every communication from Harmon, every instruction, every moment where Calloway had known something was wrong and told himself it wasn't his business. He wrote it in the direct, unadorned language of a former ranger, and what it lacked in literary quality, it more than made up for in precision. Torres read it in 2 hours and called Lara immediately. He names 3 other Vantage operations, Torres said. Not just Ridgeline. 3 other bases, 3 other contract assignments, 3 other sets of instructions from Harmon about what to document and what to acquire. A beat. Lara, this is a pattern going back 4 years. I know, she said. 4 years. Harmon has been running this since before the K-9 program was even fully operational. He saw it coming, she said. He approved the funding. He watched the program develop, and he spent 4 years planning how to take it. She paused. That's not opportunism, that's investment. Torres was quiet for a moment. How does someone in his position, he started, because people like Harmon understand something that most people in government don't want to look at directly, she said. Classified programs are invisible. Their budgets are invisible. Their outputs are invisible. When they succeed, that success is secret. When they're dissolved, the dissolution is secret. She paused. If you control what gets dissolved and what gets preserved, and where the preserved material goes, you control something that the public can never see clearly enough to question. A long silence. His lawyers filed for a preliminary injunction this morning, Torres said, trying to block the subcommittee hearing on grounds that classified program information can't be disclosed in a congressional proceeding without executive review. The committee chair's response, she said, was, and I'm quoting directly from her press secretary, "We look forward to discussing the appropriate scope of executive review with Mr. Harmon's attorneys in the proceeding itself," Torres said. Despite everything. Despite the exhaustion and the wait and the 72 hours of operating on coffee and necessity. She almost laughed. "She's going to eat him alive," she said. "She has been waiting for something like this for 2 years," Torres said. "She's been hearing rumors about contracting irregularities in classified programs, and she's had nothing she could grab. Until now." Another beat. "You gave her something she can grab." "The program gave her something," Lara said. "Rex gave her something." "Semantics," Torres said. "Not to me," she said. Yeshishag. Tuesday afternoon brought the call she'd been waiting for since Torres said, "We'll find them." State police had located the transport vehicle stopped at a facility outside Eugene, a Vantage-affiliated property that wasn't in any of the base documentation registered under a shell entity that Torres's team had been unraveling for 6 hours. 2 dogs, both intact, both sedated and stable. She was on the road in 40 minutes. Danny drove. She sat in the passenger seat with Rex 7 behind her, and the 3 of them made the 2-hour drive in near silence, not the uncomfortable silence of people with nothing to say, but the particular quiet of people who have said what matters and are now simply moving together toward what comes next. About an hour in, Danny said, "When this is over, what happens to you?" She looked out the windshield. "I testify," she said, "and then I find out." "Find out what?" "Whether the program survives," she said. "Whether the Navy decides what happened here is a reason to invest more, or a reason to distance themselves from the whole thing." She paused. "Programs that get associated with scandal don't always come back, even when the scandal was done to them." Danny was quiet. "But if it does come back," he said, "you'd run it." "I'd want to," she said. "And if it doesn't?" She was quiet for a moment. "Rex 7 is 11 years old in dog years," she said. "Belgian Malinois work until they can't. Some of them make it to 12, 13 years active, some less." She looked back at him through the gap in the seat, that dark amber-eyed presence that had been beside her through every moment of the past 4 years and more acutely the past 5 days. "Whatever happens with the program, he finishes his service with me. That part isn't negotiable." "And after that," Danny said. "He comes home," she said simply. Danny nodded. Drove. "Where's home?" he said after a while. She considered that for a moment. "Wherever Rex is," she said. The 2 dogs were in a temperature-controlled section of the facility when she arrived with federal veterinary personnel on site, courtesy of Torres's advance work. She went in alone, left Danny at the perimeter, left the marshals and the state police and the 3 Vantage employees who were quietly cooperating with federal investigators on the other side of the door. Just her. And Rex 7 beside her. The first dog, a female dark sable younger than Rex, was still sedated, breathing steadily. A veterinarian named Caldwell, who had the efficient gentleness of someone who had worked with animals in difficult circumstances many times before, told her vital signs were stable and that she'd come around within 2 hours. The second dog was awake. A male sandy-colored, heavier than Rex, with a scar along his left shoulder that nobody had documented anywhere in the Vantage records she'd seen. He was in a crate with the door secured, watching her approach with the kind of stillness that she recognized, not the stillness of a frightened dog or a confused dog or a dog that had given up. The stillness of a dog that was assessing. She crouched down to crate level. The dog looked at her. Then he looked at Rex 7. Rex 7 was at her shoulder, perfectly still, making no sound. He looked back at the other dog with an expression she had no clinical language for and didn't need one. Something passed between them. Some animal recognition that was below human vocabulary and above simple instinct. The sandy-colored dog shifted in his crate. He lay down, not in submission, in recognition. She put her hand up to the crate door, not opening it just present. After a moment, the dog pressed his nose against the wire. "Hey," she said quietly. "You did good." She sat on the floor of that facility for 20 minutes before anyone came to tell her anything else. She sat with 2 dogs she'd never met, and Rex 7 she'd known for 4 years, and she let the past 5 days settle into something she could carry without breaking under. When Caldwell came back in to check vitals, he looked at her sitting on the floor, back against the crate, Rex 7 leaning against her shoulder, and said carefully, "You okay?" "Yes," she said. You don't look it, he said. I know, she said. I am anyway. He nodded slowly. The female's coming around, he said. Another hour. I'll be here, she said. The Senate subcommittee hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the days between, the investigation moved with the specific organized momentum of a federal process that has been handed exactly the evidence it needs and finally given permission to use it. Harmon's injunction was denied. His attorneys filed 2 appeals. Both were denied. His office was placed under administrative review. His security clearance was suspended pending investigation. On Wednesday evening, Torres called with the thing that completed the case. We found Harmon's man, he said. The second handler, the one he sent into the program. She sat up. Where? He's been at the Oregon facility for the past 3 months. Vantage hired him directly after the program was dissolved. He was supposed to be training the new dogs using the replicated methodology. Torres paused. He wants to talk. Why? Because Torres said one of the dogs bit him. She waited. Not as an attack, Torres said carefully. Not unprovoked. He was attempting to run an operational sequence with the male, the sandy one you found. The dog assessed him as an unverified handler and refused to comply. When he tried to physically override the refusal, Torres stopped. The dog corrected him. The dog defended its own behavioral protocol, she said. His words, not mine, were, "The dog knew I was wrong," Torres said. And then he sat down and called his lawyer. She thought about that for a long moment. What does he want to say? She said. Everything, Torres said. But specifically, he wants to say that he documented Rex 7's refusals during his time in the program. Every incident, every assessment Rex 7 made of him. He sent those reports to Harmon. A pause. Harmon read them. He understood exactly what they meant, that the ethical calibration was real, that it worked, that it couldn't be circumvented. Torres's voice went flat. And then he ordered the program dissolved anyway, and authorized the methodology theft anyway, because he believed he could strip the calibration and keep the capability. The silence in the room was absolute. He knew, Lara said. He knew the program had built exactly what it claimed to have built, Torres said. He knew the dogs were real. He knew the methodology was sound, and he decided that the version he wanted, the marketable version, the profitable version, the version without accountability or ethics or the Navy looking over his shoulder, was worth more than the real thing. She sat with that for a long time. He deliberately broke something he knew worked, she said, and then covered up what breaking it did to a 63-year-old man in Portland, Torres said. When she hung up, she sat alone for a long time. Rex 7 came and sat beside her, not asked, not commanded. Just arrived the way he always arrived, with the quiet certainty of an animal that understood its purpose perfectly and had never once confused that purpose with anything smaller than it was. She put her hand on his head. He leaned in. She didn't say anything, neither did he. They didn't need to. The hearing room was large, formal, and packed. She'd been in rooms like this before, not many, but enough to know that the lighting was always slightly wrong, and the water in the glasses was always slightly warm, and the weight of the occasion pressed on everyone in the room in different ways, depending on what they had to lose. She had Rex 7 beside her. The committee chair, a woman in her 60s named Senator Patricia Wills with white hair, and the particular unhurried authority of someone who has been fighting hard battles for long enough to stop performing urgency, looked at Lara across the room and said, "Captain Vance, we'll start with you." She testified for 4 hours. Not dramatically. Not with the heightened emotion that television had taught people to expect from congressional hearings. She testified the way she did everything methodically, precisely, without ornamentation, with the specific gravity of someone who has done their homework so completely that they can afford to be calm. She told them about the program, about Rex 7, about the 4 years and the methodology and the 11 documented lives. She told them about arriving at Ridgeline, about the yard, about 6 men and 4.5 seconds, and a dog who had never confused capability with permission to use it carelessly. She told them about Harmon, about the contracts, about Vantage, about the 4 programs that had been hollowed out and sold, about Gerald Hoffman, 63 retired schoolteacher, who had a broken arm and a signed NDA and deserved to know why. She told them what Rex 7's refusal meant, what it proved, what Harmon had known and chosen to ignore. Senator Wills listened to all of it without interrupting. At the end, she said, "Captain Vance, in your assessment, and I want your honest assessment, not the diplomatic one, can a program like the one you've described be rebuilt?" Laura looked at the senator. Then she looked at Rex 7. He was sitting perfectly still at her side in a room full of cameras and staffers and the pressing attention of 22 senators and a packed gallery with the same absolute composure he'd brought to everything since the day she'd met him. Not performing stillness, just being it. "It can be rebuilt," she said, "if the people rebuilding it understand what they're actually building." She paused. The program wasn't valuable because of what the dogs could do. It was valuable because of what they were trained not to do, because of the discrimination built into them, the capacity to say no, to refuse a wrong instruction, to assess rather than just obey. She looked at Senator Wills directly. "That's not a flaw in the methodology. That's the methodology. And anyone who wants to replicate it for profit without retaining that part isn't building the same thing. They're building something that looks like it from the outside and is hollow where it counts." The room held that. Wills looked at Rex 7 for a moment long enough that the cameras caught it long enough that the moment registered. "The dog that was recovered from the Oregon facility," she said. "The one that refused to load." "Yes," Laura said. "And the one at your side refused Harmon's operative for 7 months." "Yes," she said. "Both trained by the same methodology." "Rex 7 trained by the full program," she said. "The other dog by an incomplete replica." "But yes, and both capable of refusal," Will said. "Because refusal isn't a feature you add," Laura said. "It's what you build from. Everything else comes after." Senator Wills looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked down at her notes. Then she looked up again. "I think," she said quietly, "that we have a great deal of work to do." Harmon was indicted 6 weeks later. 11 counts. Federal obstruction, criminal negligence, misappropriation of classified government assets, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and the count that Torres said meant the most civil rights violations related to the deliberate concealment of harm done to Gerald Hoffman. The NDA was voided. Hoffman's attorney called it a landmark. The story ran in every major outlet for 3 consecutive days. The Senate Armed Services Committee issued a formal directive reinstating the K-9 Tactical Integration Program with a tripled budget and a mandate for independent oversight. Marsh, the committee staffer who'd been feeding Harmon information, resigned the morning after the indictment was announced and received his own set of federal charges 2 weeks later. Callaway's cooperation with federal investigators resulted in a deferred prosecution agreement. He lost his contracting certification and his clearances. He also, according to Danny Okafor, who kept in touch, got a job with a veteran rehabilitation organization in the Pacific Northwest. He sent Laura a single text message the day the agreement was finalized. "I'm trying to do the thing you said. Learn, not be destroyed." She read it twice, wrote back, "That's the whole job." The 3 dogs from the Vantage program were assessed individually by a naval veterinary and behavioral team. The male, the one who had refused to load, who had corrected his unauthorized handler with one firm and measured response, was found to be an excellent candidate for full integration into the rebuilt program. The 2 females required longer rehabilitation, but they were given time. They were given handlers who understood what they were assessing and waited for the bond to form rather than forcing it. Rex 7 was formally reinstated as a classified military asset at the grade of Master Working Dog, a designation that had never previously existed and was created specifically for him. It came with a service record addendum, a formal commendation, and a legislative footnote in the committee directive that read in part, "The behavioral and ethical architecture demonstrated by K-9 Unit Rex 7 represents the highest standard of what this program was designed to achieve." Laura read that line 3 times. Then she folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket and didn't mention it to anyone. The yard at Ridgeline looked the same on the morning she ran Rex 7 through his first official drill as program lead of the newly reinstated K-9 Tactical Integration Division. Same dirt, same fence line, same cold Pacific air pressing down from the hills. Danny was there. He'd accepted a formal position as program liaison, a role that Dreyer had created specifically, and that Danny had accepted after approximately 45 seconds of consideration. Dreyer was there, standing at the fence line, the way he'd stood at his window that first morning, watching with the particular attentiveness of a man who has revised his understanding of something important and is still processing the revision. Petrakis was there. He'd applied for a position as a contracted K-9 handler support specialist, a real application through proper channels with Calloway's written endorsement, which had taken some doing. Lara had reviewed it herself. She'd approved it herself. He'd looked at her when the approval came through and said, "I didn't expect that." "I know," she said. "Why?" he said. She'd looked at him with those gray eyes, direct, unhurried, holding the whole weight of the question without flinching from it. "Because you grabbed my arm," she said, "and then you slid a piece of paper under a gate." He'd nodded slowly. "People can be both things," she said. "The question is which one they choose to be when it matters." He'd nodded again, slower this time. "So, yes, ma'am," he said. And this time, it was not the automatic reflex of a man performing deference. It was the sound of someone who meant it. Now in the yard, Rex 7 moved through the sequence she'd given him with the clean, precise fluency of an animal at the absolute peak of what he was built for. Every motion deliberate. Every pause calibrated. Every decision made with the kind of intelligence that had no patience for ego or carelessness or the comfortable certainty that the most dangerous thing in the room is always the most obvious one. He came back to her at the end of the sequence, sat, waited. She crouched down to him, looked at him directly, the way she always did, eye to eye, the way that the program had taught her, and that she had taught herself more deeply over 4 years, and more deeply still over the past 6 weeks. "Good," she said quietly. His tail moved. Once. Clean. She put her hand on his chest, felt his heart beating steadily beneath her palm. Danny came up beside her. "Ready to brief the new handlers," he said. She stood, looked at the yard, at the fence line, at the hills beyond the fence line where the gray Pacific sky pressed down and then broke open into something that looked briefly provisionally like light. "Yes," she said. She thought about what she'd said to Senator Wills, about refusal, about what you build from, about the difference between capability and the wisdom to use it correctly, and the fact that those two things were not naturally paired in human beings, but could be built into them, if someone cared enough to do the patient, costly, irreplaceable work. She thought about Rex 7 sitting in a conference room with a spy for 7 months, refusing every day with quiet certainty, knowing something was wrong, and trusting that knowledge even when no one else saw it. She thought about a schoolteacher in Portland who had deserved better and would at least now get the truth. She thought about Calloway somewhere in the Pacific Northwest learning. She thought about the dogs in the rehabilitation program taking their time, waiting for a bond that was being offered honestly. She thought about Dreyer's daughter, 17, wanting to serve. And she thought, this is what it's for. Not the capability, not the commendation in her pocket, or the reinstated program, or the tripled budget. This, the yard, the work, the patient, careful building of something that knows the difference between strength and destruction, and chooses every time to use one in service of something larger than itself. Rex 7 walked beside her toward the gate, unhurried, certain, ready. She opened the gate. They went through it together, and in the yard of Camp Ridgeline on a gray morning that was breaking slowly into light, the work began again, the real work, the kind that doesn't make headlines or fill hearing rooms. The kind that is done quietly and faithfully by people and animals who understand that the most powerful thing in any room is not the one with the most force, but the one with the clearest sense of what that force is for. Rex 7 had known that from the beginning. He always had. And now finally the institution he served had learned to know it too.